There are some sounds that the human brain is not designed to process. A gunshot, maybe. A woman screaming. But this was different. It was a sound that didn't just enter through your ears, it felt like it resonated in your bones, a low, vibrating hum that made the water in my canteen ripple. And then, it said my name. Not in a whisper. Not in a language I knew. But in a tone so deep and ancient that it vibrated in my chest, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was calling me. Martin. The boy from Douala who was just trying to make a few francs in the logging camps. That was 3 months ago. I haven't been back to the forest since. And I don't think I ever will. My name is Martin. I'm a wildlife tracker. Well, I was. In Cameroon, if you have a good eye and can tell a gorilla nest from a diker trail, you can find work. The big logging companies, they hire guys like me to scout ahead. Make sure there aren't any protected animal colonies in the section of forest they're about to turn into plywood. It's not glamorous, but it pays better than selling phone credits in the market in Douala. This particular job was near Yakaduma. Deep bush. The kind of place where the internet signal dies a full day before you actually arrive. My boss was a fat Frenchman named Monsieur Dubois who cared about one thing, timber. My partner was an old Baka pygmy guy they called Vieux Paul. Vieux Paul was short, wiry, and had skin like old leather. He didn't talk much, but he knew the forest like you know the back of your hand. The first sign that this trip was different happened on the second day. We were following a stream, mapping it for the survey. Paul stopped dead. He pointed at the bank. The mud was torn up, but not by a hippo or an elephant. There was a huge, deep furrow, like someone had dragged a massive log from the water into the trees. But there were no branch marks. And the trees on either side, their bark was scraped off about 4 meters high, as if something huge and tall had squeezed through. I laughed. A big elephant with a bad attitude? Vieux Paul just shook his head, his eyes wide. He whispered something in his language, then pointed to the river. Mokélé mbembe, he said. He is angry. We go back. I'd heard the stories as a kid. The Mokélé mbembe. The one who stops the flow of rivers. A dinosaur-like creature, they say, that lives in the deep bends of the Congo Basin watershed. A monster. A spirit. I just laughed again. Paul, that's just stories for tourists. It's probably a forest elephant with a skin disease. He didn't laugh. He just turned and started walking back to camp. I had to beg him to continue. Eventually, he agreed, but only if we made a small offering. He placed a piece of dried fish on a flat rock by the water, muttering under his breath. I thought it was funny. Superstitious. I stopped thinking it was funny about 4 hours later. By nightfall, the atmosphere had changed. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the hooting of owls, were gone. It was silent. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, watchful one. Vieux Paul refused to light a fire. He just sat in the dark, staring toward the river. I tried to make a joke. Paul, relax. If the monster comes, I'll take a selfie with him. We'll be famous on Instagram. He didn't even look at me. The river owns this night, Martin. We are just guests. And guests must be quiet. I woke up in the dead of night. I don't know what woke me. I was cold, despite the humidity. My watch said 2:13 a.m. And then I felt it. A vibration. A low thrumming that started in the ground and traveled up through my spine. It was like standing next to a massive generator. Vroom. Vroom. I looked at Paul. He was frozen, just a silhouette in the dark, his hand gripping his small machete. Then came the sound. Whoosh. A massive intake of breath, like the world's largest bellows, coming from the river. It was followed by a sound I can only describe as a deep, guttural groan that turned into a kind of hum. It wasn't an animal sound. It was melodic. Ancient. It lasted for maybe 2 minutes. Then, silence. The regular forest sound slowly returned, as if someone had turned the volume back up on the world. In the morning, I wanted to run. But Monsieur Dubois would have killed me. Or, worse, fired me without pay. Vieux Paul was calmer. He said the offering was accepted. The Mokélé mbembe had just been talking. But we had to finish our job and leave, and we absolutely could not go near the river. So, we worked inland. For 2 days, we tracked, mapped, and stayed clear of the water. I started to relax. I started to think it was just some weird geological thing, or a bullfrog. You know how the mind tries to explain away the impossible. I convinced myself it was a bullfrog. That was the mistake. Believing it was a bullfrog. Because on the 3rd night, it stopped being a background phenomenon and became personal. We were camped on a small hill, a good kilometer from the river. Safe, according to Paul. I was half asleep, dreaming of cold beer in a bar in Bertua, when I was pulled from sleep by that same deep vibration. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was a thought. A feeling. I heard my name. Not shouted. It was like the vibration itself was my name. Maertin. It rolled through my mind. It wasn't a human voice. It was the sound of the riverbed grinding against itself, shaped into syllables. Martien. I sat bolt upright, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. The air was thick, heavy, pressing in on me. I looked over at Paul's sleeping spot. He was gone. His mat was empty. Panic seized me. Paul. I hissed into the darkness. Nothing. I grabbed my torch, but the battery was dead. Of course. The forest was pitch black. The only light was a faint, sickly green glow coming from the direction of the river. I was terrified. But the thought of Paul, that old man who had shown me which berries were safe to eat, out there alone. I couldn't leave him. I stumbled through the bush, branches whipping my face, following that eerie green light. The vibration grew stronger with every step. It was in my teeth, in my skull. And the voice, it was clearer now. It didn't just say my name. It showed me things. Flashes. Images in my mind. A huge, serpentine neck rising from swirling water. Eyes like pools of oil reflecting a million stars. A feeling of profound, crushing loneliness that wasn't my own. I broke through the tree line onto the riverbank. And I saw him. Vieux Paul. He was standing knee-deep in the black water, completely still, facing the center of the river. The green glow was emanating from the water itself, illuminating the clouds of mist that clung to the surface. And in the center of that glow, 2 massive, reptilian eyes were rising from the water. They weren't looking at Paul. They were looking at me. Directly at me. The vibration intensified into a single, clear thought in my head: you who sees. You who doubts. Why do you fear knowing? I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The head continued to rise, a long neck, slick with mud and moss, impossibly large. This wasn't an animal. This was a force of nature. A guardian. Then, Vieux Paul spoke. But his voice was layered with that deep hum. It was like he was a radio for the thing in the water. He remembers you, Martin, Paul's voice said, but it wasn't his voice. It was older, slower. He remembers the ones who laughed. The ones who threw stones. The ones who took the trees. He sleeps for a long time. But he is waking. And he is calling his children home. As he said this, the water behind the creature began to churn. And from the depths, shapes began to rise. They weren't creatures. They were logs. Massive, ancient trees. But they weren't floating. They were moving against the current, their roots like grasping hands, dragging them toward the bank. Toward us. Toward the logging camp. The Mokélé mbembe let out one final, earth-shaking sigh. The thought that slammed into my mind was so powerful it dropped me to my knees. Tell them the forest is not theirs. Tell them the river takes back what is hers. And then, with a rush of water, the creature sank. The green light faded. The massive, moving trees stopped, bobbing harmlessly in the current. Paul collapsed into the shallows. I dragged him out. He was cold, but alive. He just looked at me, his old eyes full of a fear I now understood completely. We ran. We ran all the way back to the logging camp and lied. We said we got lost. We took our pay and left. A week later, we heard the news. A flash flood, they called it. An unprecedented surge of water that came out of nowhere in the middle of the dry season. It wiped out Monsieur Dubois's entire operation. Trucks, equipment, the temporary bridge, all swept away. No one was killed, thankfully. But they said the logs, they said it looked like the river had risen up and deliberately scattered the piles of harvested timber back into the forest. I never saw Paul again. He went back to his people, deep in the forest. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is still, I feel a faint vibration in my chest. A low hum. And I know he's still there. Watching. Waiting. Making sure the forest remembers, and that we never forget who it truly belongs to. My name is Martin. And I don't track wildlife anymore. Now, I just listen.